Lahiri Mahasaya wrote, "The mind is the connecting link between the soul and the senses. Divine perceptions are acquired when the senses are spiritualized. Joy, sweetness, and exaltation fill the entire being when the sense faculties are purified and inspired by the purity of the soul. The body is the holy temple. God, as the indwelling soul, is the deity. One who is enlightened knows this truth." So again, this quote from Lahiri Mahasaya. The mind is the connecting link between the soul and the senses. Divine perceptions are acquired when the senses are spiritualized. Joy, sweetness, and exaltation fill the entire being when the sense faculties are purified and inspired by the purity of the soul. The body is the holy temple. God, as the indwelling soul, is the deity. One who is enlightened knows this truth. So we touched upon this briefly in the previous section of this series. It's something to consider and contemplate and meditate upon it. Because the more you meditate upon it, the more you'll understand how to activate that within your life. And then you'll know and understand what Lahiri Mahasaya knew. Now, I have a more extensive quote from Roy Eugene Davis, which will take us into the next topic of discussion. So Roy wrote that when Paramahansa Yogananda lectured and taught classes for several years in the major cities of America during the third decade of the last century, he also initiated students into Kriya Yoga meditation practices. It has been estimated that during his lifetime, he initiated more than 100,000 people, most of whom neglected their spiritual practice after a short lapse of time. Referring to those early years, Paramahansaji said, "I was sowing spiritual seeds in the soil of the subconscious minds of the people who came to hear me speak. I knew then that only a few individuals would remain faithful to their practices." He also said that some disciples who did persist on this path experienced exceptional spiritual growth. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the texts that you can find a wonderful commentary by Roy Eugene Davis called The Eternal Way. It's also the basis for our Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship Year 1 course. We go in detail exploring the Bhagavad Gita. But in the Bhagavad Gita, there's an idea, a thought, where Krishna says, of the hundreds of thousands of people in the world, and of course, this was written when we didn't have so many people on the planet, of the hundreds of thousands of people in the world, probably scarcely less than 1,000 actually try to know me, to understand me, Krishna, that supreme, infinite, divine consciousness, supreme awareness, supreme oneness. Of those hundreds of thousands, probably scarcely 1,000 actually have a will, a drive, an understanding, an inspiration to know what that's about. And he goes on to say, probably only one of those 1,000, or scarcely few of even those 1,000, do what it takes, have the capacity even to grasp, embody, flow one's attention and awareness, abide in that consciousness. And Yogananda, when he came to America, the United States, in the early 1900s, you really have to think about the level of awareness and consciousness and state of society that he was coming into. Much of this was brand new to people, so that's why he was sowing these seeds. Because in that amount of time, almost 100 years later, we see in our culture, yoga is a common word. Even people who barely even know what it's about have heard that word. They know it. They've heard meditation before. It's prevalent. Yogananda had said that yoga and meditation would be taught in schools. We find that to be true today. So oftentimes, what many teachers do when they share knowledge and information. It's simply sort of planting these seeds in the subconscious of those seemingly individualized souls. It's also helping to illumine societal consciousness or the collective consciousness. And so even if you on your own are practicing and you don't get very far, you don't do very well, or you don't know what you're doing, you haven't really spent time exploring all the avenues of learning that are available to you, it's still good. It's still helping. It's still providing fertilizer for those spiritual seeds to grow. But Yogananda said that some disciples who did persist on this path experienced exceptional spiritual growth. Because once you get clear on your intention, you remain persistent, you don't fall away. He says that of the 100,000 people, or more than 100,000 people that he initiated, most neglected their spiritual practice a short time later. And why would that be the case? Well, the buzz wears off. You go to a meditation retreat and you experience the pulling away from your normal society, and you experience the uplifting qualities of being around people and a teacher who embodies that. It creates this kind of sort of inner buzz. And then when you go back into your normal life, you slip back into your old patterns, you get up at the same time, you do the same things, that old self is able to kind of come back in. And so one of the most important things to do is to recognize that you have to remain consistent, and you have to look at this whole process long term. You have to make notes for yourself. Okay, I'm going to practice meditation for this amount of time every day, even if I don't want to. I'm going to read various spiritual texts every day just to kind of keep my mind on that space. I remember spending many hours driving or at home or when I would go for walks, listening to talks by Mr. Davis or other people that helped kind of keep me focused on what was important. As many people have heard in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program, I was a musician, still am. I played a lot of music. I listened to a lot of music. The first 5 years that I began practicing Kriya Yoga, I quit listening to everything. I mean, I listened to music a lot. I loved music. I stopped listening to everything that I listened to up until that point because it was sustaining my old sense of self. And I had to get it out of my mind. I had to get out of my consciousness. So I was not always having these, old song lyrics going through my head or old thoughts of songs going through my head. I changed my diet. I changed my sleeping schedule. And for me, I did that pretty quickly because in what I've noticed is that if I try to do something a little bit at a time, maybe I'll do all right. And for most people, I think that's useful because it's easy to build up in smaller stages. But I had to be a little more drastic. I had to cut it all out and then rebuild from there. And that allowed me to have the space to remain consistent so that I did not neglect what I knew to be true. But you need to find that sweet spot for yourself. The amount of changes which is just enough to make you or your little body, mind, and personality uncomfortable. So you have to do something different. You have to break out of the old mold. You have to do things slightly different. Get up, sleep on the opposite side of the bed. Try eating with your other hand instead. Do anything that you can to kind of break up that old pattern of yourself. If you don't exercise, start exercising regularly. Start thinking about yourself differently. If you think of yourself as a victim of circumstances, if you think of yourself as having all these problems that you can't overcome, start at least 5 minutes a day spending that amount of time thinking differently about yourself, recreating yourself. And imagine this to be a long-term process. What do you want to feel like in 2 to 3 months from now? How long do you want to be meditating 2 to 3 months from now? Set a goal. Keep them short enough that you can achieve them, but long enough that you recognize that this is a long-term process. Mr. Davis also wrote that over the years, I have initiated several thousand people, and he estimates approximately 10% of them have remained in contact with me. Where are the others? What are they doing? And when he wrote this, he probably would have been in his late 60s, I believe. I think this was around the time that I had met him. What are they doing? A few have died. Some are involved with various metaphysical, yoga, or New Age studies and practices. Most of them are living ordinary, self-centered lives, preoccupied with their jobs, secular interests, family members and friends, and endeavors to satisfy their material, physical, and emotional needs. Now, you can read that, or you can hear that, and you can think, oh, well, so he's saying that we shouldn't be preoccupied with our jobs, our secular interests, our families, our friends, and our endeavors to satisfy our material, physical, and emotional needs. But I remember in other talks or other things I've read by him where he says, become emotionally stable, take care of your physical and material resources, be appropriate to your family and friends. Remember in the previous discussion, I think it was the previous discussion, if not, it's in here somewhere. He's discussing being preoccupied. And in the previous discussion, we stated that the fully enlightened individual is able to play their role, but they're able to withdraw their awareness and know what is true of their eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, timeless nature. You can't be preoccupied with jobs, secular interests, families and friends, and material resources. You can't be preoccupied with that and still experience your clearest nature, meaning it can't dominate your awareness. It can't dominate your awareness. It's the same thing when it comes to, for example, often health issues. If you've got a health challenge going on, yes, you get treatment and you get it done, but you can't spend your whole day obsessed with your health. You have to do what needs to be done and then do the other things. Of course, there are certain situations where that's a little more difficult to do. But I think you understand to take that analogy in the way I intend it. So when it comes to waking up, when it comes to focusing on your spiritual growth, you have to find that balance to where you're able to let go of your preoccupation with all these things that you think matter. Even if it's just for 30 minutes a day, during that 30-minute segment, you decide right then, all these other things do not matter. You have to begin practicing developing your capacity for non-attachment, at least in that 30-minute segment of time. Another practice that can be very helpful, you'll meditate better. You will have the actual experiences that you're meant to have in meditation if you can find a way to do that. Now, we have to remember that your life is a global thing. And those individuals who have participated in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course know that I am a proponent of getting help when you need help. So if you have some mental, emotional things that you've not dealt with, you have to work through, then you find a counselor to help you do it. But you don't become preoccupied with it. You don't define your life by it. You get someone to help you, you make the choices, you grow beyond it. If you have issues with finances, you find someone who knows how to be successful financially, you do what they say. Then you forget about, oh, well, I want to live my dream and I want to have all this stuff right now. That's not how successful people typically do it, unless they get extremely lucky. I've been thinking about doing a series on the secrets to spiritual prosperity, because everyone loves that. Everyone wants to hear the secrets to spiritual prosperity. Well, I can't do the series because it's pretty simple. If you want to have prosperity, get a job. If you want to have more prosperity, get a better job. Or find some work that allows you to be prosperous. And forget about You want prosperity, right? Do you want happiness or do you want prosperity? If you want prosperity, do the hard work, the grind, the grueling work to be prosperous. If you want happiness, I will tell you that you can have all the money in the world and it's likely you will still not have happiness. So those things are not mutually inclusive. But anyway, that's off the point here. we want to focus on what does this mean about being preoccupied. To live a spiritually centered life is radically different than what most people, how most people live their lives. And this is essentially what this is getting at. Yogananda, he didn't live a normal life. His goal was meditation, clarity, and then sharing that because that was his role. Many of the saints and sages that he wrote about in Autobiography of a Yogi, they didn't live normal lives either. Their focus, their attention was on God, divine consciousness, and they let everything else fall away. But can you find that sweet spot? Can you find that balance where you can play your role, learn to be emotionally balanced, mentally poised? Can you have a well-organized life? Can you do whatever it takes to have what you need financially? Can you do that? Can you find a way to do that? And rather than getting caught up in, I don't like this isn't inspiring me, well, it's part of your practice of non-attachment. Most spiritual texts that you find, there's a strong emphasis on non-attachment. And you have to develop non-attachment so that you can let go of attachment to this body-mind unit so that you can meditate well and experience what the point of that is. And it may be that in your work, you're learning to practice that by not being attached to what your emotions or feelings are about this. It's learning to also practice non-attachment. So you have to, when you read things like this, most of them are ordinary, living ordinary, self-centered lives, preoccupied with their jobs, secular interests, family members and friends, and endeavors to satisfy their material, physical, and emotional needs. You always have to put things into context. Don't take things out of context. The key here is preoccupation. When it's time to do your job, you do your job. When it's time to have recreational activities to keep yourself happy, healthy, and strong, you do that. But you don't become fixated on it, preoccupied with it. What you become fixated with is the ability to stay clear and internally peaceful inside. That's the preoccupation which will lead to clearer awareness. And Roy goes on to write that I provide accurate information about the real purpose of human life and how to awaken to self and God realization and pray for the welfare of everyone. It is the personal responsibility of sincere truth seekers to improve their understanding, make wise choices, and do whatever else is necessary to awaken to their full potential and be receptive and responsive to God's grace. That's what this is all about. Your sincerity, your commitment, your balanced life, that creates the recipe for the potential to be receptive and responsive to God's grace. Because when you've lived a life focused on the spiritual ideals described in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Bhagavad Gita, when you've really thought about it, when you just haven't read those texts and said, oh, well, that's nice. Sure, homelessness is a good thing to think about. Non-attachment, non-possessiveness, those are neat. I'll get around to it. But when you fully start to embody this, and this is something we cover with great intensity in year one of the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course as we study the Bhagavad Gita, then you start to have insights, aha moments. This is what it means to see God's grace, the potential to be receptive and responsive to this grace in this temporal life situation, while I'm also recognizing that there is an aspect of myself which is beyond time, which is beyond this personality, which is beyond my secular interests, my emotional needs, the issues of my family members. And I can't explain that to you in a short amount of time like this. I can't explain it to you at all, really. But the role of the spiritual teacher, the spiritual mentor, the person who's sharing this information is to help reveal what you need to do so that you catch that understanding. Consider all the things that we've talked about, and spend some time reflecting upon how do I understand this? How can I apply this based on where I am right now don't stress yourself out about it. How can I apply this where I am right now so that I can start taking actions, so I can start looking forward and planning my life and living my life and structuring my life such this becomes a reality for me. Once more, let's conclude with the opening quote from Lahiri Mahasaya. The mind is the connecting link between the soul and the senses. Divine perceptions are acquired when the senses are spiritualized. Joy, sweetness, and exaltation fill the entire being when the sense faculties are purified and inspired by the purity of the soul. The body is the holy temple. God as the indwelling soul is the deity. One who is enlightened knows this truth.